how to avoid toxic tennis. I got invited here. Tessa was really interested in me talking about this subject after finding out about some of the other talks that I've given this group and other groups. So I'm going to jump right in with a question for y'all. And by y'all, it probably sound extremely American right now, so I apologize for that. So how many of you have thought or said something like users suck? I can tell you I certainly have. I've said that and similar in my first decade working for tech when I was a wee baby web dev or things like that. Being a frontline tech, certainly when I was answering email and in-person calls or in-person visits and support calls for a tiny ISP, all sorts of things. That's how I cope. That's how we all cope with feeling like most days we are fighting these uphill battles when trying to help people who are hostile or panicked or oblivious. And I had to deal with their emotions along with their problem. And it turns out that while I was trained in dealing with problems, I was not trained in dealing with humans and emotions. And what about this sentiment? The other side, support sucks. I've certainly felt this way as well. Like when my internet's been out and I've had to call and deal with somebody with it. And I get that feeling where support doesn't feel helpful, like they're not listening, like maybe they're not even responding. I have one, a horror story that I will not get into now where I spent like 2 or 3 different attempts at chatting before I got someone who actually responded. So after the call, I went to my partner or my friends or Facebook about the quote unquote support I got. I've had that same feeling with a lot of help centers and documentation sites, feeling like I can't trust them if they seem to make it hard for me to find useful, accurate help on my own, like terrible organization, terrible SEO, or just finding out the materials like years out of date. Like that's just terrible. And pardon me, I'll probably be coughing a little bit because I think I started coming down with something the other day. So when these sentiments start to collide, when we say users suck and they say support sucks, I call this toxic tennis. It's where one side projects really discouraging, unhelpful energy. So maybe it's the user wearing their frustration or anxiety like on their sleeve, like very visibly, like not able to hide it. Or maybe it's the tech, or maybe it's us, drained of energy to where it's hard to keep up a facade of like positive energy, positive experience, helpfulness. Whoever starts it, often unintentionally, risks the other side lobbing that energy back, and then you get back and forth again. Tennis. And you might also see other places in life where you could see that toxic tennis happening, like with coworkers or friends or spouses. So maybe this talk will help you in other arenas as well. But the focus here is on about toxic tennis with people that you don't really know and may never meet again. So then I'm Ryan Macklin, tech writer and empathy advocate. This is a talk that's about this core concept called empathy advocacy, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So I'm going to assume you don't like playing the toxic tennis game. If you do, this talk is not for you. You're probably really good at it. Just, keep on keeping on. Here's what I want to offer to help not play this game. I want to get into what's really behind toxic behavior. And actually, this is a very empathy advocacy thing, is to understand the psychology behind what goes on before we even talk about solutions and tips. It's going to be a woefully brief trip into the psychology of distress. I want to provide 3 subtle ways to respond and why they work within that framework of the psychology of distress. 3 pitfalls to avoid and why to avoid them, again, in that framework of the psychology of distress. And caring for yourself, which is the hardest part and is often skipped in talks like these, but is paramount to success. Again, in the framework of the psychology of distress. And since this audience is so varied in job roles and experience levels, I'm here to offer several ways of thinking about problematic user interactions, but there are no magic solutions. This user psychology is really, really difficult, and I feel really rewarding in dealing with it. But it is a really difficult space. I'm not going to try to sell you some magic pills that'll make everything better. So to solve every problem, we need to start by understanding the factors behind the problem. In this case, why do people, users or us, lob that energy? So we're going to be talking about motivations here, just very internal, like hindbrain motivations. They're the feelings behind the actions or urges to act. Now, these feelings, these motivations are not inherently bad of them in and of themselves. It's the actions, what we do with those feelings and motivations, our conduct, our behaviors that can be bad, that can be problematic. It's absolutely okay to be angry. It's 100% natural to be angry at times, but it's not okay to yell at someone. And that distinction is so critical. You'll hear me bring it up multiple times in this and other talks. So broadly speaking, let's divide up our motivations for toxic behavior into 4 buckets. People who get overwhelmed with panic or anxiety, basically they hit that flight response really, really hard. People who are overwhelmed with combativeness, people who are really frustrated or angry, they really hit that fight response really, really hard. People who are overwhelmed with feeling vulnerable when they're feeling very cornered, very scared, hits sort of a combination of that fight or flight response. And people who are overwhelmed with exhaustion, they just have nothing in there. They've got no juice to actually deal with anything. So these buckets of motivation kind of lead people to doing sort of toxic tennis sort of things. And the source of all of that comes from our brain. So behold your brain in all of its glorious colors. There is a tiny part tucked inside called the amygdala. It's the part of the brain that deals with happy, sad, fight, flight, etc. It's the emotion brain, sometimes called the hindbrain or the lizard brain. When it rages out of control, which is AKA you getting activated, it floods our brains and our bodies with all sorts of chemicals. And you're likely familiar with one of the primary ones, good old adrenaline. When that happens, our prefrontal cortexes, the part that handles executive functions like problem solving and self-control, can't actually engage until that flood subsides. The amygdala has like primary control, and it's really difficult to engage other parts of the brain. That is dysregulation in a super rough nutshell. And if any of y'all are in neuroscience nerds, my apologies for the 30-second overview of a super complex topic. Part of our problem when it comes to dealing with things like activation, dysregulation, is that we're not great at compartmentalizing. We get mad or freaked out by something, we'll project that onto the next annoyance or issue. It'll compound and go and keep going and keep going until we reach the point where we're overwhelmed and dysregulated. So you can imagine some random person shouting at you. Your amygdala floods with all sorts of chemicals. Your brain gets in that fight or flight mode. 10 minutes later, you get to work, you attempt to log in, and for some reason your password doesn't work. So you're still carrying that activation in your body. You don't get to quote unquote leave it at the door. So you get that urge to just flip the table, and hopefully you don't, but you at least feel that urge to do so. So once we're in that overwhelmed state, we naturally want to get out of it. Like that's the primal element. These emotions, feelings, motivations come from a primal part of the brain that is wired to help us survive and thrive. And it wants us to act on those impulses to escape whatever situation is causing that activation. I call it looking for exits, since the point of those actions, again, to get out of the primal state. The 4 broad categories of exits I have that go with the motivations, like panic leads us to want to escape, to want us to flee a situation somehow. Combativeness leads us to want to triumph, to want to basically beat the thing that is sort of in our way, that is in our like view, that like, bull looking at, at red sort of thing. Vulnerability, when we're overwhelmed with it and aren't really trained in it, leads us to want to get control in order to basically reassert not being vulnerable, to become invulnerable again. And exhaustion leads us to looking for rest. Whether that rest is taking a nap or that rest is just like fiddling around on social media, just scrolling mindlessly, that is actually the brain disengaging to try to rest. If someone feels alone, those are the exits they naturally go toward. The exit they head toward informs their conduct and reactions. Like people who are looking to triumph are going to be a lot more aggro. People looking to control are a lot more snide, etc. So finding healthier, more productive exits can require assistance, and feeling like that assistance is on their side. And that's where a lot of you come in. So Unfortunately, that cooperation that we need users to do, or we need ourselves to do, takes energy. It takes energy to act with thoughtfulness, inquisitiveness, and a sense of understanding the consequences of our actions. It is easy to do when we're full of energy. When we're out of energy, it feels like the only option is to act and react on impulse, because impulses take less energy. Just listening to our amygdala takes less mental energy than engaging our prefrontal cortex when we're sort of under duress. Um, for some, that impulse is unhelpful or even toxic, because again, we're just trying to get to one of those exits. And it's really unfortunate, because a lot of times we don't have the mental energy to just be kinder to each other, because we're trying to protect ourselves. And it's terrible. It's a really sad situation. And it's not all cut and dry. It's possible to act cooperatively when we have some drain on our energy. Some people still choose not to act cooperatively by their very nature. It's a mixed bag, although we have ways of influencing behavior to our and their benefit, as long as they have at least a tiny bit of energy that we can work with. So, and there's so much more to the psychology of distress than that, but now you need actionable material. So let's keep going. So the first of the tips that I have on subtle ways to encourage sort of the cooperative, regulative sort of behavior is in what I call witnessing their struggle. So people can feel alone when they're in distress. And that, again, that when they feel alone, they're going to go toward that impulse exit that they're looking toward. Dysregulation can make anyone into a threat, including the people who are trying to help, including you. Whether you're trying to help directly as a support person, you're trying to help indirectly, the passive support such as documentation, whatever way in which you're trying to help, you could end up looking like a threat or an imposition or something like that to the dysregulated mind. And helping someone feel not alone can be calming. And I'm going to get to what that means to be calming in a moment, because it is a lot more than just sort of the simple word calm. Now, that's great. That's all high concept stuff. I want to offer a few phrases that help give you some actionable elements and sort of where they fit in. And maybe this is part of a script. Maybe this is something you're able to slide into documentation or put into an email blast that you're sending to all users, something like that. So that sounds really stressful, is a statement about how you're listening. And listening is a cooperative activity. It is a cooperative, non-challenging necessarily activity. I mean, some people will still maybe take a little umbrage to it. And some people who are prone to being hostile and don't want help, they're not going to be able, you won't be able to necessarily help them. But the people who are feeling hostile or dysregulated in some way and their part of their brain is still looking for help, that will, this is a really good listening tactic. I'm sorry you've been dealing with that. Is apologizing. It's a good, like, general apology. It's not the I'm sorry if you feel blah, 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 which is that typical really like toxic apology that gets called out a lot on social media these days. This right here is just, a little bit of empathizing, like, hey, you've been dealing with that. That's terrible. And you can mirror another way of empathize, which is, I hate when that happens to me too. Be able to say, like, it isn't just you. Like, I'm on your side because I, want to help somebody who is experiencing sort of unfortunate things that I experience. Now we get to offer small breathing moments. That's our second of the tips on subtle ways of influencing behavior toward a good resolution and away from the problematic exit states, and thus the problematic conduct that we would love to avoid. Now, dysregulated people keep moving towards exits. There's sort of a constant motion toward those exits. Even if that exit is shutting down because they're out of energy, that's still an exit, and there's still a constant move toward that. Again, as we talked about, sometimes that movement is really unhelpful because it generates those difficult interactions that make it so that somebody either can't process the information we're giving them because of the difficulty in getting the prefrontal cortex to handle information in order to do some sort of task that, again, is also an executive function element. So that's so we want to then give them moments that can help stop that movement, that can create a sort of a calming element. And here's where I'm going to come back to calming, because then that can be regulating. So the opposite of dysregulation in the brain is the brain being able to regulate itself. And we can't make someone regulate. What we can do is we can offer moments to help them regulate themselves. Now, what does this look like in practice? What can we do to have these sort of moments where we can get the other person to pause? Well, you get this a little bit in things like, let me pull up your account information, right? That's there. Like, it still feels like you're helping. Ideally, you are actually, helping. But they're sort of forced to pause. They can't make any movement toward any exit in that moment. Gives them a chance to regulate. Doesn't mean they will, but at least gives them a chance to breathe. Sort of allow me a moment to check on our system. It's similar, but it's not necessarily about their account. Just be able to find, hey, we might have this as like a known issue in other states. Let me go ahead and see if this is a common thing or if this is just you. Or, a consulting moment of, I'm going to see if this needs to be escalated. All of these sorts of moments force the momentum to stop. And so hopefully by not being able to get to any exit, we can give the other person a moment to breathe, and we can recalibrate to go toward that more helpful resolution exit. I can say that I've definitely experienced this when I've on a call that I had to deal with a few months ago about trying to return some exercise equipment. And just basically, I went from being really, really angry to sort of being able to calm and breathe, with a combination of, having somebody with a friendly tone telling me they're looking at my account information and empathizing with me about how my order being several months delayed was really terrible. And I went from being like feeling the impulse to want to yell and having to spend energy not going into a toxic impulse, into being calmer and be like, okay, let's see if we can solve this problem. But don't overpromise or lie when it comes to these things, or anything really. But because I'm offering something that says, hey, can you inject a moment? Don't lie about it. Don't overpromise it. You don't want to create doubt and unreliability, because it erodes user trust. And you erode one bit of user's trust, you can actually erode it in an entire user population, because people talk. So the last bit is to provide time frames. When people are forced to deal with uncertainty, like not knowing how long to wait, that creates a vicious void. And you don't want to create that vicious void, because dwelling in it heightens emotional responses. It's the opposite of breathing moments. It's sort of spiraling moments. So providing time frames, providing senses of certainty will help stabilize some of that void. Here's a visual, because I love making visuals for things. So for calm people, these voids are there, but they're small. They're easy to cross over. And people might not even realize they're crossing over anything. For dysregulated folks, these voids are wide and treacherous, a flimsy bridge and lots of terrible thoughts waiting below, just wanting to pull you in, especially ones that might be related to like past trauma or past bad experiences, are really, really eager to pull you in. And so when you're able to provide information that helps stabilize that bridge, like timeframes for waiting, you don't get rid of the void, but you can at least make it easier to cross the people who are dysregulated. And then we go. So now 3 pitfalls to avoid. First of all, don't tell people how to feel. When you if you shame somebody for how they feel, you're being adversarial. You're lobbing a tennis ball right back at them, because we aren't actually in control of our emotional spikes. We might be able to be in control enough to regulate away from that, but we have no control over the spikes themselves. We can't instantly create mental energy if our mental battery is really low. So telling people to do things like, hey, you need to pay attention is not necessarily going to do anything except bring somebody to grab to one of those unhelpful motivations or conduct that gets them towards an exit state, that gets them out of the situation where they're feeling like they're being attacked. And yeah, like, don't shame people for how they feel. People feel the way they feel. It's natural to feel that. The problem is not how they feel, it's how they're acting. So some phrases to avoid calm down. Like that, again, that's just not helpful at all. You can think about when it comes to these here, I'm going to say this: calm down. There's no reason to be angry. That's a classic one too. And you need to pay attention. And for these sorts, I want you to think about times where you've been told something like this and your reaction was to just like either walk away or lash back out or anything other than do the thing that was just demanded of you. So, and if you're going to react poorly to these sort of situations when you're tired, it's very reasonable to believe that other people will react poorly to it as well. So do curb abusive conduct, though. I'm talking about emotions, and telling people to not feel certain ways is unhelpful. But do curb the conduct when the conduct's abusive. You don't do it by telling someone how they should feel, though. You focus on the conduct, not shaming for a neurochemical response, saying like, hey, this thing, isn't helpful, or like, I won't be able to help you if you keep, swearing at me, for instance. Highlight the conduct, not the feeling. And then don't bombard with information. Exhausted and panicked people can't process dense text, so don't give them dense text to process. Frustrated and controlling people will pick that stuff apart in order to use it as weapons in order to triumph or control. So you want to be careful about what you throw into dense text. And in general, you want to keep the cognitive load on people as low as possible to not deplete the energy that they need to both process that text and then do whatever they need to do with that information, and then do whatever they need to do for the next thing in their day and the next thing and the next thing. So, techniques for reducing that load. You delete your preambles. If you've seen a recipe blog that starts with the huge story before what's needed, you've seen the worst of preambles. It's because these people are being paid by the word. We also do this in tech, feeling like we need to give a lot of historical background in the support doc when users just need to know whatever's after that unnecessary intro. If you have info you can put behind a for more information kind of link, do it, especially in email comms. Don't overload your email with every piece of information you think you need to communicate. Let people who have the energy and desire for that more information click on your links, whether that's the moment they're reading that email or they come back to that email like an hour or a day later thinking, oh, well, I want to get a little bit more on this. And then this trick is mainly for sighted users, but it's really common. Use font choices, colors, and visual storytelling techniques to guide the eye where you need them to go. It is easy to go overboard with this. So I'd say like this is where finding best practices online and seeing what they're doing is helpful. So I've definitely done the overboarding part before a lot, and it's been unhelpful because the eye doesn't know where to go. And then here, don't simply direct the documentation. This is something I see a lot in support messaging, and by see a lot, I mean I've also done this. Directing someone who's to seek help elsewhere can be dismissive. Like if I'm coming to you because I have a problem, you're like, oh, just go to this thing. It can be felt as very dismissive rather than cooperative. Exhausted and panicked people, they drop issues. Like they don't have energy, so asking them to go somewhere else is asking them to expend energy or to walk away from escape. And so a lot of times they'll just drop issues if you're trying to direct them somewhere else. And frustrated and controlling people escalate with the hostility because, again, feeling like they're being dismissed takes combative people into wanting to continue fighting and controlling people to want to make you do the thing that they want you to do, as opposed to feeling like, oh, maybe this is the right resolution or step. Now, with calm people, this is not a problem, but I don't frame any of the concepts of calm people, because if I help calm people, or if I help these other activated states out, the calm people also get helped out as well. Now, you might need to point to docs at times still. It's pretty natural. So here's like a couple ways to acknowledge that there's a doc site in order to help the user sort of get to that point of being able to self-service either now or in the future. Which is, you could say, like, do you know about our support center? The articles in there could save you time waiting in line in the future if there's a queue or anything like that. Might be able to put that at the end without forcing them to necessarily engage with it. Or did you try XYZ doc? It'll help if I know which step you're stuck on. These sort of statements, again, bring this up in a not shameful or judgmental way. Since that shame or judgment can look like a toxic tennis ball going back at them. Even if it's not the intention of that interaction, if it's read like that, then there's that lobbing back and forth. It's not great. The last bit here is talking about caring for ourselves, which is a common line heard on every flight is put your life jacket on before assisting others. And in mental health circles, this is a common and important adage. But when you're pelted with toxic tennis balls throughout the day or week, it's rough. It can really feel hard to keep afloat if you're drowning in toxicity, and especially as it feels like your life jacket is starting to deflate. So self-care isn't necessarily the pampering yourself that you might see out there. It's recognizing that how you feel is entirely legit. You don't repress it. You don't it just makes it worse. You sort of forgive the fact that you feel in a certain way rather than hold shame for it. You learn to recognize your own emotions and the sort of exits you unconsciously look for, and and the motivations that you do. Like, a lot of times my default exit when I'm in a stressed out situation is to basically like close my door and turn off everything and just go into like my chair and zone out. And my partner's sort of default exit is to actually look for support from me. So sometimes when we're clashing, we're actually not helping each other out. So we've been noticing those different states and trying to mindfully learn new ways to get to different exits. And then respect your psychological needs, because if you don't, you'll transfer that toxic energy to someone else undeserving. Maybe another user, maybe somebody at home, and definitely, I would say, the most undeserving person at all, which is future you. And so the idea that if you get better at caring for yourself, you will learn new ways to help others. Like, really, like, this entire thing of empathy advocacy came from this concept. So let's go ahead and wrap up here, which is that I like to end these talks with a call to action. This one is simple. I'd like you to reflect on any instances where you could improve your own conduct or responses, thinking about what might have happened over the last couple of weeks and how you could use what I've talked about today to help you going forward. So yeah, I'm still Ryan Macklin. I have some other talks on my site, and including a primer on empathy advocacy, which is what led me to getting invited to this talk here. And I am very, very rarely, but at times, on Twitter. So thank you very much. So yeah, I'm happy for questions and comments now.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm seeing there was some good chat going on. I think we've come to the conclusion we have some pretty awesome users, the researchers that we serve, which is excellent. But just personally, I actually think that some of what you're saying I can apply to working with my coworkers as well, and interactions that I have with my coworkers, and actually arguing a little bit better with my partner.
Yeah,
that's for me, that triumph control thing. I was like, oh, is that the like wanting to have the last word?
It absolutely
like,
is. Yeah.
It was like, yikes, that was a big self-awareness moment for myself.
The empathy advocacy is a very like trauma informed, game design informed field that it's really new field that me and basically a small handful of other people are trying to turn into something where it's not just me occasionally giving talks. So yeah, that sort of senses of interaction are definitely the core of it, like knowing why people interact the way they do when they don't know why they're interacting. But yeah, and again, yeah, there's so many things. I've been in a really great couples counseling with my partner. We're doing really, really well, and our couples counselor basically teaches us how to translate our the fact that like me and my partner don't speak the same language. Having a translator has really helped in that regard. In a lot of ways, what I'm hoping with this talk is that it allows some sort of translation between like toxic user behavior and what they're actually going through, and how responding to bad behavior with bad behavior of our own unconsciously just kind of makes everything go back and forth, and it makes everyone's day terrible. So
Exactly.
but yeah, the thing is like I have a lot of really excellent users at my job. I do internal security systems. But yeah, still people get really tired because it turns out that you don't really get a lot of rest during the day. And so you just watch people's, energy just kind of deplete. So even with really amazing users, you can get these moments as people start to basically shut down or feel overwhelmed or things like that.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. I'm pulling out a question here from
Mhm.
the chat,
Yeah.
and everyone's typing so quickly. I got to go back up to Pierre-Luc's question. Sorry, just give me a moment, everybody.
Mhm.
Question. I usually start by assuming our users can read and they're smart enough to follow our documentation. We have a really well up-to-date taken care of documentation. So then how can I avoid citing a documentation page that has the exact solution to the problem that is too dense for the user? Do I have to copy, all this wall of text into my message?
For that would be, so it's absolutely legit to assume that your user base can read and follow documentation. The trick is, do they also have the energy level and the presence of mind to do that, which is very variable. For that, I'd say if you can gauge whether or not the user just couldn't find the documentation versus they don't have the cognitive capacity to do something on their own in that moment, I'd say like, asking like, hey, have you checked this here? Did this work for you? Like that, being able to share it, but in a way that doesn't say, hey, go read this, but did this work for you? That may be a way that you're able to help. Otherwise, I would say, and if that has a lot of visuals, you may have to honestly put it there, be like, hey, how about you open this and let's work through this together, can be a way that somebody who is in a state where they need support, not because they don't know how to do something, but they actually need another person in that regard, can help. If it's got a lot of visuals, you might have them open it and just say, let's walk through this together. Or if you get a sense that your best bet is to basically just like copy one step or a couple steps at a time, that would be the way to do it, and just walk them through step by step rather than giving them a lot of text to have to like process steps altogether. So sort of like maybe walk them through it, and then the end's like, hey, I got this from here. So if you have this problem, somebody else has a problem, feel free to check this out. Those would be the three possible tactics that I would use in that case. And I would just also document when they do and don't work and share that with other people, because the only way we can really make this work is if we can share this information with other people, and to fun, because user bases are all different.
Yeah,
Hopefully
exactly.
that helps.
I think it does. Thank you. I wanted to go back to, I liked your slide that said, which step are you stuck on kind of thing, right? So maybe if you're providing that summary link or doing exactly what you're describing, you're assuming they've read it, but maybe they're stuck on a step.
Yeah.
Also comment in here that, yes, we like to cite the docs, but finding things in our documentation is still not that easy. So
Yeah.
there's empathy for our users there. Yeah, go ahead, Mark. I'm going to keep looking through the chat here. You've got your hand up. Please go ahead. Well, you might be muted there for me.
Hi, I was wondering whether there are technical aspects to how the interaction happens that can be tweaked to improve things. So for instance, we don't do any voice support or at least not officially. And most of the sites used to have a web interface for support, but
Mhm.
we actually shifted to doing straight email. So
Mhm.
users tend to just fire off an email to support at Canada,
Mhm.
which removes the affordance we used to have. That is, having them look at a FAQ or ask a few questions or get a little advice before opening a ticket.
Mhm.
So these are technical issues that would improve the nature of the interaction from the very beginning and might help.
Yeah, the like I'd say, yeah, doing a pure email based situation. So if you're stuck with staying with email, but you can create some sort of automated elements, where like auto response components to it, and that auto response can be customized based on keywords, then you might be able to create a tailored, like, hey, we've received this, basically it's the receipt of it, and maybe have, like, based on your contact your content, here are a couple help articles that may assist you while you're waiting for a response. So if you can do that, that will be better than just, hey, can you go to our help center for stuff? Because again, that gets to just navigating something. Like if you think about every link that someone has to click on, where they have to make a decision about what to click on or what to type on or what to type, that is depleting mental energy. You have a lot of mental energy. I've got this in another talk. I've got this thing about having brain dollars that you're spending on everything. And if you have a huge brain dollar account in the moment, spending like $1 or $2 doesn't really feel that. But if you're really, 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 like, near brain broke, then spending that $1 or $2 in order to figure out, do I click on this article? Do I bother reading this article? Things like that, that depletes it further. So whatever you can do to provide that information, but make it contextual enough, can help. It's essentially would be the email version of the support site, where it asks you for some like general, like, what section does this go in, and then like type in your problem, but also on the side, here are some possible resolution articles for you. So that could be it. There's a lot of technological things you can add, but you really have to, at that point, leverage more robust stacks than email. But email is really easy to maintain, so I understand why you do that. But yeah, if you can have a custom autoresponder, that might help.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mark, for the question. Thanks, Ryan. Just pulling out some stuff in the chat here where people are noting that, screenshots can be really helpful for users when you're using the command line. That's text only. But then we've got people saying, yeah, if I really need to help someone, we'll get on a Zoom or a Skype call because I need to see their screen.
Yeah.
And I need to really talk them through that. So they're just talking about, once they've had that email communication through the help desk, what they might then do for the user.
So I do want to caution one thing against screenshots, and I've got like a small talk that I have on that, which is screenshots can themselves be really overwhelming. There's a lot of visual information to process. So use screenshots sparingly when you want to make sure that the reader is, or the user needs to see what's going on. Like I've seen back when I was early, I would make like every single step would have a screenshot and be like 10 steps. At that point, people just filter past the screenshots. So if you reserve screenshots where you want to highlight something critical, something that's easy to miss or anything like that, that's definitely the time to use screenshots. Otherwise, stick when you can to text-based elements, not just because it's more accessible, but a lot of text-based directions teach people how to use an interface. If you tell someone, go to the left and select this, they are forced to engage in their brain. Like their brain is basically going to the location and having to process the whole concept of navigating. If they just see visual, they're just imitating rather than processing. I call it the GPS effect, where if you use your GPS to get out of your neighborhood, you may not actually learn your neighborhood at all. But if you wait until you're at a place where you don't, like, okay, well, I'm on the highway and I want to know how long it's going to take to get over to, wherever I'm going, then you've learned how to deal with your neighborhood, and you're basically just, from there, going on autopilot on the thing you don't need to remember. If they're dealing with the system they're not going to use very often, that's not necessary. Help them out, give them screenshots. But if it's one that they need to get familiar with, help train them by creating tiny bits of speed bumps that they have to learn how to get over. But if there's a huge speed bump, absolutely give them that screenshot.
Thank you. Lots of kind of comments on the GPS analogy and the screenshot piece there. So thank you. I find it useful when someone sends something back to me. They're like, "Is this what you're seeing?" Right? It's like a
Absolutely,
screenshot
confirmation
of like
style. Yeah.
And I'm missing clicking some, innate button, right? Like it's just a confirmation of what am I seeing? It's the quick way of not having a Slack call or a Zoom call for what's happening and what I'm seeing. Yeah.
Using that as confirmation rather than hand-holding direction is great.
Yeah. Just wanted to, we've got a few more minutes. Anybody else? Lots of great chat going on here. Thanks everybody. Anybody else want to ask a question in the chat there or?
Yeah, I've been also watching
unmute?
the chat. This has been amazing. Like I'm like mentally taking notes for
I can give you the chat log.
Absolutely. That is
our
fantastic.
team is so amazing with engagement, and it's always really useful to go back and look at the chat. Maxim, go for it.
Yeah, I was thinking at what Mark said, and I'm not sure if I captured the idea right, but to me, whenever there's a company that in order to reach support, I have to select what is the support about, does this answer your question, and I have to go through 5 or 6 or 10 menus before finally firing off an email. I find that really annoying personally.
Yeah,
but how is that perceived in general by users? Are there studies about that? And if it's poorly perceived, why the hell do those companies do that?
Well, so I'd say like limiting it to like 1 or at most 2 things you have to select. That's where I would stop at that point when it comes to it and say, okay, at this point, we have to rely on our staff to do the filtering from there. Companies do a lot of things out of what I would call misguided but well-meaning attempts at helping people. Because I'm sure there's research out there on that specific topic. I'm not sure where that is, and I'm definitely interested in finding out because I love user research in general. I'm a terrible user research person. I've got some great user research people that I work with, but people tend to do that because they are trying to create efficiency, and they've been sold by systems that certain ways of being efficient will save time on their end, thus save money on support. And I'd say that like at that point, the study that I would want to see is getting information about how often those users drop off and basically stop trying to do anything in the process. Like if they've got like, here's 5 questions you need to ask, like when do people drop off after 1? When do people drop off after 2? I mean, and in a really messed up way, that's also a cost saving measure because if people don't actually go all the way, then you're not spending money on support. That's the cynical me talking. But like that's a lot of it. A lot of these systems are basically designed to make it so people don't have to spend as much money on support.
And I personally hate those chatbots that like, they'll be like, can I help you? And then you ask a question and like, it doesn't matter how I phrase the question. It'll be like, I don't know that. Like, it'll be like, sorry, don't have the answer. And I'm like, like, why are you here? You're useless to me. I'll just now have to find who I can email. And
right.
as Maxim says, go through all the layers to find that person.
And it's actually just the same thing if you actually chat with someone like a real human, but they only go through a script. Like, have you tried X? Let's follow these steps when you know it's actually not the problem.
Yeah.
Chatbots are getting better as machine learning is allowing us to figure things out. They're certainly not perfect, but a lot of times, like, I think that they can actually be much more helpful than throwing warm bodies who aren't very educated on things, who are like your first tier support at problems that are just going through scripts, and then escalate you to second tier support or whatnot when can you turn your computer on and off or off and on again is not sufficient.
We're just over time. Ryan, if it's okay with you, I'll ask the team if there's any other questions, just knowing that we're just 1 minute over. And
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for you taking the time to be with us today. So
Yeah,
any
absolutely.
last
This has been a
minute-
delight.
Oh, thank you so much. And I just know you put so much work into this. I so appreciate you. So anybody got a last minute comment or question they want to share? And I will share that chat with you as well at the end of the day here.
Yeah, great. And yeah, I mean, this has been great. If there's it looks like nobody has another question right now, which is totally fine. I'm happy to have people digest, and I would love to hear if people are able to use any of this, if they found that it's been actionable at some point. Feel free to reach out to me, and either through Tessa or just on my rarely checked Twitter. And yeah, and if there's any sort of topics in here in particular that are worth unpacking, I make talks all the time, so I'm happy to take any other opportunities to help people learn about these sort of things.